What's up, everyone? We are back for Locked On Bucks as Milwaukee get ready to start the road to the postseason. They're going to do that with a game against the Brooklyn Nets. Frank's here. We're going to break down some lineup stuff, look ahead, ask some questions, and maybe just generally take a temperature check on where we think the Bucks are at as they do begin the road to the postseason. So let's get started.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Bucks. I'm your host, Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on the show Monday to Friday. Also find some other stuff over at ESPN. Joining me, the founder of brewhoop.com and longtime voice of the podcast, Frank Madden. And we always thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of every weekday. We've had a few days off from podcasting with each other, Frank. All-Star break come and went. I did send a message out and said, have you got any takes about the All-Star weekend? He said, not really. I said, fair enough. I'm gonna podcast anyway, but I don't blame you for that. But what does a distinguished Bucks podcaster like yourself do with the All-Star break? Are you feeling fresh? We both got haircuts, so that's what we did with our break.
Yeah, I think I've commented on this podcast multiple times over the past 2 weeks how I needed a haircut. So I finally did something about it. I did watch the All-Star game itself. It's so funny how differently I'm sure most of us process the All-Star game and All-Star weekend now versus previously. Just the idea of having an All-Star, right? When Giannis first broke through, becoming an All-Star starter, it was like, oh my God. And you wanted him to do so well. And, him being thrust in the spotlight, and it was very new, right? I mean, literally, what had it been? It'd been like, was it like Michael Redd in 2005 or something crazy? Like was the last time they had an All-Star before that? And so now it's just so different because it's like, they're the NBA champs. Giannis is a multiple-time MVP, and All-Star trips, and he won MVP at the All-Star game last year, right? So it's just like the stakes feel so much lower, and the idea of them, the Antetokounmpo is doing the skills challenge, it's just like okay, whatever. Chris, I don't even want Chris, or when Bobby was talking about doing the 3-point shootout, I was just like, don't even bother, guys. Like Chris has done this twice, and it's just like, he sucked in both of them, and it's just a random thing. Like, who cares, right? So anyway, so I skipped All-Star Saturday night entirely. Normally, I will watch the dunk contest. Sounds like I made a great decision not to watch the dunk contest. But I did tune in for the game, and I watched the 75th anniversary stuff at halftime, which I enjoyed. I thought, my first favorite player, David Robinson, was standing, I think, like right in front of Giannis, obviously my current, favorite player. So that was pretty cool for me, just as like a, now 40-year-old fan who's, basically been following this game now for roughly 30 years. Just kind of cool to see kind of the beginning, and, well, I don't want to say the end, but the beginning and the current, sides of my fandom be represented on the stage. And, I think just from some of the shots, you could tell Giannis, it was not lost on Giannis, how big of a deal this was. I thought back to, our friend Eric Name's story, when they told Giannis that he was, I think, 24 on the Athletic Top 75, and just, how big that was for Giannis, and how I think that realization, I think that was one of the first sort of, rankings that had been done, that probably he heard. And I think, it seemed like we were almost seeing in real time, like him sort of coming to grips with where he really is in the history of this game already at the age of 27. So, again, the game itself, it was, Giannis rolls out of bed and puts up 30, 12, 6, and 4 stocks, right? Like that, he just pretty much had a regular Giannis game. But it was fun. It was fun seeing the game get serious in the fourth quarter when they went to the Elam ending. It was fun seeing Giannis. Probably my least favorite Giannis block of all time. I've never seen him block Chris Middleton before, so unfortunate that Chris was, caught the friendly fire there. But cool block. You know, he had a couple other defensive plays that, you know, again, was kind of like, all right, Giannis being Giannis, and hit one of those glamour shots. Kane hit one of those turnaround jumpers there in the fourth quarter as well, when they were kind of zoning in on the final. So, you know, fun to watch, and kind of reminds me, you know, I got a bit into the Winter Olympics spirit here, Kane, and I don't know. I think short track speed skating is bullshit. Probably isn't the right word for it, but it's a little tacky to me. Now I say this because, and keep in mind, if Americans were winning gold medals left and right in short track speed skating, I would probably think it's awesome. But, you know, being just a typical American front runner, I kind of now view, since Americans aren't that good at short track speed skating anymore, and even when Paulo Antonono was winning a lot of medals, like that's when I watch it, and just like you'd have like people wiping out all the time, and like people getting eliminated for illegal stuff, and it's just like, this is like demolition derby. But have you ever seen the races where, in these races where like they go really slow, if it's like a longer race, and they go really slow for like multiple laps, and like nobody wants to make a move? It kind of happens in like longer distance, like 5,000 meter track events too, where like, you know, nobody's wanting to really stretch it, and then finally someone starts going fast and they all go like crazy, and, you know, in the last couple laps they go nuts and chaos ensues. That's kind of what the All-Star game felt like to me. It was kind of like, you know, the first quarter, it's like, okay guys, like all right, like can we make it feel a little bit less like a layup line? Can you not just completely, I mean, literally guys like getting out of the way on defense to let guys go to the basket. It's like, I want to see let's like feign some degree of competition. But I thought as the game went on, obviously people started to take it a little more seriously. And I felt like at the end of the third quarter, when the Bucks, when Giannis' team was trailing, and they seemed to be very cognizant that they needed some stops in order to tie the third quarter. And then obviously the fourth quarter, when it kind of everything comes down to it, I thought it was more fun, and obviously a pretty cool way to end it with LeBron hitting that shot in his return to Cleveland. So long story short, yeah, All-Star weekend was fine. And when I say All-Star weekend, I mean All-Star Sunday night, because that's the only thing I watched.
The block on Chris, Giannis said afterwards, and this was after I podcasted with Camille, so we didn't talk about this, but he said he didn't really realize that it was even Chris. And I remember I've asked Giannis before about his shot blocking and what he's thinking or what's going through his mind. And he just kind of laughed and said, I don't really know. I just do it instinctively. I see someone, I think I can do it, and I do it. That's the perfect example of that. Poor old Chris. Thinks he's in the All-Star game. He's had a rough shooting night. And by the way, I know, Bucks fan, yes, he's cold stretch continued in the All-Star game. I'm very aware. But then Giannis comes from behind and blocks him. So it's a tough scene for him. Everyone should check out. We did a roundtable podcast yesterday. If you missed it, we had our friends from Locked On Bulls, Locked On Cavs. Evan Damarol was literally just happy to be there. He said that about 17 times throughout the podcast. Just very excited that the Cavs are playing good basketball. Locked On Heat was there as well. So go check it out, because we broke it all down. But I want to ask you what the big question you think is around this Bucks team as we start the run to the postseason. They start with the Nets, which feels fitting. They started the season with Brooklyn. They start the second half, quote unquote, of the season with the Nets as well. But first, I'll talk about BetOnline, because football is done and dusted. The basketball is just starting to warm up. So whether it's the college stuff, the NBA stuff, you can get all the odds, totals, player performance props, all at betonline.net. It's the number one spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. They've got hockey, boxing, UFC, right to any sport you can think of, honestly. Vegas casino games, it's all there. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. That's BetOnline, where the game starts. Also, don't forget to check out the Locked On Now podcast. You get little snippets from the Locked On experts like myself on the Bucks after they play, so you can catch up with the night before's action. So check out the Locked On Now podcast. It's good I listen to it. I have it in the background there and catch up with all the hot takes flying in from the Locked On hosts. So check it out, the Locked On Now podcast. So Frank, and I was just thinking about this because I was listening to the Low Post. I know you listen to the Low Post as well. Jeff Van Gundy, Zach Lowe, discussing a few big questions. And I was wondering for you, what is the big question for this Bucks team? And they were obviously talking about the defense. I think that's fair enough. That's certainly something that I mentioned on the Roundtable podcast yesterday as well. The simple answer is Brook Lopez, I guess. But what are you looking at? And we should have mentioned, if you want to dive into the the big signing of Javon Carter, we can also do that as well. I had a few people ask if there was an emergency podcast. I couldn't bring myself to do it yesterday. No disrespect, but we're here now. So all it takes, we can let fly.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been saying on any platform that anyone will give me, the big question, the big concern has been Brook Lopez. That's the how big is an elephant? I don't know. The 50,000-pound elephant, the 2-ton elephant, the gorilla, whatever large animal in the room. That is the injury to Brook Lopez, and when he comes back, how quickly he ramps up, and can he stay healthy, right? Because even if he comes back, it's not like there's some inevitability that he's going to be fine in the playoffs and give you the minutes that he gave you last year. So I mean, I think that's still the simple thing. I think you hit on it right away in the roundtable, and I think you were pretty blunt. Maybe surprised the other the other guests when you said that without Brook Lopez, like you don't see them winning a championship. And I'd agree. I mean, stranger things have happened, right? I think the Serge Ibaka trade at least gives you a chance that you can talk yourself into the idea that the Bucks could be okay without Brook Lopez, or they could maybe find some way to paper over that. But I think again, if you lose Brook Lopez and you already don't have PJ Tucker, which was sort of your small ball guy with Giannis, I think that's just a kind of a bridge too far. And again, the defense that they had last year, papered over some really bad stretches of offense. And so I think that's the silver lining for me is, Drew Holiday. And I think this was, you guys hit on this as well. But I mean, Drew Holiday, his scoring was horrendous, with a few exceptions in the playoffs, but overall, nowhere close to the guy that we saw last regular season, that we saw this regular season, and actually that we saw in the playoffs previously. Again, the Pelicans didn't have a ton of, playoff opportunities, but when they did play those 2 rounds a few years back, he was tremendous against the Blazers, and I think he was fine against the Warriors in that next round too, which was pretty short. So, again, I think overall, to me, the big question is going to be, what does that sort of trade-off look like, and can they be good enough defensively, and matchup wise, do they have enough tricks up their sleeve? Does Bud have enough options defensively that the defense can do what it needs, and the offense can hopefully be better, more consistent than it was last year? Because obviously, especially in the second round, in particular, the offense was not firing on all cylinders. From 3-point range, it basically, was sort of a slog throughout. So I think that's kind of the big question. They got up to 35% in the finals, which was really good by their standards. Their offense actually came around a fair bit by the finals. So they had a 117 offensive rating in the finals. So I mean, the scoring actually did come back in the finals. It wasn't a defensive slugfest in the finals, but again, I think, when you look at sort of the trade-off that really started this summer, if you want to think about it, it's not like the Bucks, opted for Grayson Allen in lieu of PJ Tucker, but in some ways that from a practical standpoint was kind of what they traded. Especially, we talk obviously that, well, it's Grayson in, Dante out is effectively what happened, but since Dante didn't play in the playoffs after the first round and PJ took that starting spot, that's kind of one way of how I would think about this, is that basically, you're trading PJ Tucker's defense for Grayson Allen plus a number of other guys. And I think, when the Javon Carter signing happened, fine, that would be my take on it. Again, he's a defensive oriented guy. He's not particularly big, so he's not going to defend guys other than point guards. He's not going to be like key to some like switching lineup or something like that, right? You hope in the playoffs you don't have to play him. He basically didn't play at all for the Suns when it really mattered in the playoffs last year, even though he had a pretty decent season in the regular season. So again, you hope he doesn't play. And again, George Hill has taken the Jeff Teague minutes, right? So you hope you don't ever have to get down to your third point guard in the playoffs, but you just never know. I think this is much more of a kind of papering over the regular season. Lindell Wigginton, my guy, Kane.
He is your guy, and
my guy. He's at 70% true shooting. He's probably been about as good as you could hope. I don't think that's going to continue. He doesn't have a track record of being a great 3-point shooter. I think he's at 54% 3-point shooting right now. So, bringing in a guy like Carter, who's a little more proven, he can knock down an open three, and he defends pretty hard. So, in the grand scheme of like giving you some minutes, hopefully George Hill is back soon. If he's not, you can throw Carter out there and hopefully steal you some minutes. But I think in the net, we were talking about before the podcast, and this sort of plays into kind of think your broader question. But when I took another look at the minutes in the finals last year, and again, matchups, depending on a series, right? Matchups will dictate minutes going up and down. We saw that during the playoffs last year as well. Bobby Portis famously, right, didn't play at all against the Nets, and then became much more important in the following two series. But if we look at the minutes, right? Giannis 40 minutes per game, Chris 43, Drew 42, Pat Connaughton 30, Bobby Portis 17, Brook Lopez 25, right? Let's for simplicity say that all those things keep constant, right? We can argue, well, Bobby Portis is going to play more. Yeah, probably, hopefully, right? Hopefully he earns more minutes. So what is really changing, right? As we try to forecast, well, what happened last year when you won a title? How do you map that to what the team looks like this year? And the obvious thing is there's three guys that basically you're swapping out. Foremost of all that is PJ Tucker. PJ played 31 minutes in the finals. Jeff Teague played 9 minutes per game. Bryn Forbes played 7 minutes. It's about 48 minutes that you have to replace in your rotation, right? With those three guys, and it's really mostly one guy. And the interesting thing is you didn't have Grayson Allen last year. You didn't have George Hill last year. Obviously, Serge Ibaka, you've just added to the roster here. Wes Matthews potentially also part of the equation here as well, given his defensive abilities and the fact that he may be useful in switching schemes more so than the Bucks' other wings, not other than Connaughton. So it's kind of, I think that's sort of the interesting question that Bud is going to have to figure out. Those four guys, none of those guys are as individually as versatile defensively as PJ Tucker. All of them, save for Wes, are, I would say, better offensive players in their own respect, right? You can argue Serge maybe isn't as much, but Serge, I think again was showing signs at least of being a more consistent offensive player than PJ, who gave you obviously very little, right? And PJ averaged 4 points per game in the finals. So I think again to kind of highlight that implicit trade-off that the Bucks have made with their roster construction this year. You look at those guys and it's ironic, right? Because you're basically saying, all right, you're going to trade a wing and some undersized guard minutes from Forbes and Teague. And easy to say that obviously George Hill is going to gobble up probably all of those all of those Teague and Bryn Forbes minutes, right? That's about 60 minutes per game. So give George Hill all of those. But then we haven't even talked about Grayson Allen. We haven't even talked about Serge Ibaka. We haven't even talked about Wes Matthews yet. And so how do those things kind of break out? Then we started, I think, talking about Mike Budenholzer and him having to make some difficult decisions, because last year it was pretty much just like, well, hey, PJ isn't going to be great offensively, but he was just the guy you were going to throw out there, and his versatility defensively, the fact that he could at least crash the glass offensively, park in the corner, at least he was a guy that could fit in there, even if he wasn't a great, a net positive offensively. So I don't know. I mean, to me, this is going to be one of those things where those guys' minutes probably are going to fluctuate pretty significantly. I mean, I would assume Grayson Allen is going to be the starter going into the playoffs, right? Could there be a scenario where he may not start for the entirety of the playoffs? I think that's certainly possible depending on matchups and given that he's not the strongest defender. But this is where Mike Budenholzer is going to really have to earn his money this postseason. And it's not just going to be as easy as just saying, screw it, throw PJ out there.
So I think the other, and I was thinking about this as I was going through some of the other teams, the obvious downside of not having PJ Tucker on your roster is that he could potentially be on another roster that you meet in the postseason, and he's going to be a giant pain in the ass for Giannis and all these guys in some of those lineups as well. So that's the other side of this that I know people are very aware of. I did have some of the numbers, though, with some of the preferred lineups. You mentioned maybe Grayson Allen slides out of the lineup. And I think it's one of the interesting questions that we'll never know with Dante and PJ last year. It's just one of those things that was, again, taken out of his hands, as you pointed to, that he didn't have to make that decision. But speaking of making decisions, sometimes you have to do that with your car, Frank, if you have issues. And rockauto.com is the best place to go, because with the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. So you can go to rockauto.com. You'll save time. You'll save money. You can save up to 30%, 50%, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers. They've been doing it for over 20 years, and the prices are reliably low for every customer, whether you're an expert or just someone like me. So go explore their easy-to-use website today and find a solution to your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Just write Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box today? Now we set you amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. One other point on Bud, when you talk about shortening the rotation, you might be right that this year there's more guys that he can throw out there, but we should say generally when push has come to shove, Bud has been willing to cut bait on guys in previous seasons. This year, yeah, he might have some more difficult decisions to make, but he has kind of done that. For all the talk of, playing guys more, and that obviously came to a head during the bubble playoffs, there's no doubt about that. I guess I'm just wondering, with all the uncertainty, and this goes for all teams across the league, I'm looking at numbers and lineups, and I'm like, goodness, the best players on most teams have not played together a lot this year. That's just been the nature of the season for a number of reasons. And the Bucks' big three, and I know there was the record stuff that was a number that people were saying, but I think we've discussed it. I don't know exactly what their record is together, but I know that they played a bunch of pretty bad teams that probably inflated that record there, and that probably adds to these advanced numbers as well. But just generally, the big three, Giannis, Chris, Drew, who've played 31 games out of 60 together, they're only averaging 15 minutes per game across that, 15.8. Offensive rating 116.3, defensive rating 104.8, so a plus 11.5 net. Obviously, that's pretty good. But the defensive number in general and the defensive numbers in general with Giannis on the floor have been pretty good. So when you look at that and you say, okay, well, they're playing 15 minutes together per game when they've been in the lineup together, isn't the answer simply just play your best players more in the playoffs, play those guys 30 minutes together, and they're going to be much better in general? And that was kind of one of my answers on the roundtable when they asked me why the Bucks can win. I said, well, you got Giannis playing more. They've been great with him on the floor. And it's obviously it's very simple, but when you have a guy that's as good as he is, that is going to be the answer to a lot of your problems. As far as swapping the guy out, I assume if you're looking at it, and of course, if there was some weird matchup, I don't know what it would be, where you thought that you would play someone like Ibaka. We've spoke about, is there benefits of bringing him into the starting lineup for defensive purposes? But the other guy, I think, obviously would be Pat. If he's healthy, if he's back in the lineup, you swap him in for Grayson Allen, you probably feel like you're a little more versatile there defensively. The starting lineup of Portis, Allen, Drew, Chris, Giannis, out of the five-man lineups, they've played 243 minutes together, and then the next most used five-man lineup is like 50 minutes or something like that. And it actually is the swap for Connaughton and Grayson Allen. But both those lineups, whether it's Allen or whether it's Pat Connaughton, the net rating, again, is in double digits. The lineups are very good. Now, obviously, that's probably having that Giannis, Chris, Drew factor in there. But the point being, the best lineups of this team, the advanced numbers look pretty good. So is that part of the solution as well? Just play your best players more.
Yeah, but I mean, at the same time, like that's going to be everybody's solution, right? I think, it came up a little bit, right, in the context of some of the other teams that the Bucks are facing off with, Miami, which, when I looked at the Heat's rotation preseason, I thought, they don't have much depth at all, right? Yeah. Because you look at, it was like, well, they're bringing Hero off the bench. But then it was really Max Strus, Gabe Vincent, like, Dwayne Dedman. Like, is that really going to be, the group that's going to carry you, given you also don't have, a superstar on the level that some of the other top teams have? And I mean, sure enough, it has been, right? I mean, depth has been a plus. And the question obviously is, do you get, bubble Tyler Hero again? Do you get that equivalent from these other guys that have played so well for them during the season? And, I think, again, the Bucks benefit is that your top end just gets emphasized more and more, the further you go in the playoffs. And I think, when I think about my level of optimism for the Bucks in the playoffs, I think my pessimism is probably derived from a couple things. One, it's just really hard to repeat. I mean, you guys have heard me say this, like just doing it once is really hard, requires things to break your way, no matter what season we're talking about. Doing it twice, again, just takes maybe a different set of breaks, but you still have to have a lot of things break your way, right? You think about just how often a missed shot here late in the game, right? Chris Middleton, if he doesn't outduel KD in game 3 against the Nets, right? That's, I think, probably one of the more forgotten things was the way that Chris and KD were going shot for shot late in game 3, which of course, if Bucks lose that game, that series is, curtains. If any of those shots don't go in, right, what happens, right? Bud's fired. Giannis still can't win the big one, right? We never see the
Rick
finals.
Carlisle's the coach, and
Rick Carlisle's the coach, right? So there's just kind of that, like, just doing it twice is just fundamentally hard. And then I think one of the X factors is, sure, every year the defending champ and the two teams that go to the finals have longer seasons than everybody else. They have a shorter offseason than everybody else. But last year was also unique from any other season we've had. The number of games the Bucks played in the calendar year 2021 will never be matched, basically. I think, what was it? Pat Connaughton played like 108 total games or something like that in the calendar year 2021. So it's still a little bit of an unknown. I think over these next 20 games, you just hope that you can keep those guys somewhat fresh. This All-Star break, of any team, I think Bucks are certainly one of the teams that probably can use this more than anyone, not because they're the most banged up team, but they've also, they've had some injuries, and, Drew and Chris have had the shortest off seasons anyone can remember with the Olympics as well. So, again, I do kind of wonder, they've generally had good health, right? Knock on wood. Over the sort of during the Bud era in general, you haven't had one of your main guys other than Brook really this year go down with a long-term injury, and hopefully you get Brook back. So again, you just hope that you avoid disaster. Seeing this Chris Paul injury, right? Kind of another reminder. You just never know when somebody's going to get an injury. We saw with Pat. Obviously, Pat should be back with plenty of time left before the playoffs. So I think those are kind of my, those have been sort of like the things that kind of nag at me as far as being able to repeat and kind of the things that are stacked against you. But the flip side is, as you said, and this is why people, I think, generally have not really been questioning the Bucks that much, because everybody questioned the Bucks for a few years, and then, they were okay during the regular season, and they turned into, obviously, a team that won a championship last year. So that's probably, that's nice, good for our sanity, probably, that, the Bucks haven't been turned into a soap opera. I think the other piece too is that the Bucks just don't have much drama internally, and it's a credit to them. They don't have guys demanding trades. They don't have guys, hating each other, calling each other out in the media. And so they kind of end up being pretty boring, and there's not a lot to really look at there in terms of, locker room turmoil and things like that. Really, I mean, kind of the Bud coaching question was probably the biggest one, closest we've seen to that sort of stuff with the past couple of years. And that never was like a, does Giannis want Bud out type of thing. So, yeah, I mean, it's again, it's kind of hard to believe there's only 22 games left here in the regular season. And I would say this, they have the hardest remaining schedule in the league. I mean, I think at this point, I don't know where you're at on this, like as far as your expectation of where they're going to finish seeding wise. If they get the 4th seed, I would be happy at this point. If they get any home court in any round, I would probably be happy, just because they're 5th right now. They haven't been super impressive during the regular season. Have shown flashes, a lot of similarities to last year in that regard. And again, the schedule isn't favorable, but I think the one thing I thought was interesting, in Jeff Van Gundy was on the Low Post, and he made an interesting point where he said he actually thought it was good for the Bucks that they do have a difficult schedule to finish up, because it's going to be more of a challenge to them. They're not going to be having, a bunch of cruise control games against the kind of drags of the league as they kind of go into the final stretch here. I don't think that's good for their standings and the likelihood of them getting, a top 3 seed or something like that. But I will hope and put some stock maybe that Van Gundy is right, that at least from a, veteran team getting focused and locking in a little bit, that playing more competitive teams will hopefully maybe spur a bit more sharpness and demand more of them as they roll here towards the playoffs, versus, again, if they had a really difficult schedule early in the season and now they were just going to, face a bunch of lottery teams late. But I don't know. We'll see. I'm going a little stir crazy here. The next couple of days are going to be hard without basketball. The fact that the Bucks have a couple of days without games when the league is coming back is pretty annoying to me. But we'll see. With Brooklyn on Saturday, it sounds like Ben Simmons still isn't, but that's probably going to be back. So you hope that it's a little bit easier of a matchup to kind of ease back into the swing of things, because certainly the Bucks and long layoffs has not been a positive thing in the last year or two in terms of their sharpness.
Yeah, interesting that Ben Simmons obviously at the facility. He's practicing. He's ramping up, I guess they call it these days. But we'll see whenever he returns. But the Nets are obviously going to be a fascinating team. It does look like Kyrie Irving sometime in the near future will be playing every game as well. So that'll be a boost for them. And maybe in a weird way, maybe there's some teams in the East that are going to finish first or second that'll be happy if they can slide up to the 6 or 5 seed or something like that, so they don't have them in the first round. We'll see how that plays out, but it'll be a good game to get things started. We'll see if the Bucks can pick up a win to get the stretch run to the postseason underway. Make sure you check out the Locked On Bets podcast with Frank's mate, your boy Q, and handicapping expert Lee Sterling. Fantastic podcast they've got going over there, so make sure you check that out. It's a beauty.
It's kind of an interesting dynamic, because it's like, I don't know really if there's going to be much difference between finishing first and fourth, right?
The Bucks, and by the way, the Bucks don't want a game 1 at home. I know you said that you want home court advantage. It makes sense. Bud feels his way into a playoff series. We understand that. He peaks around game 4.
Yeah. And Giannis peaks in game 6, as we now know.
Yeah, so it's for Bucks fans, what are you going to be worried? You're going to be scared if you're down 0-2 in a series? No way. Not this team. They'll be just fine. But I don't know. I don't think it's going to be an interesting playoff run anyway. We'll have plenty of time to talk about it. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll be able to talk a bit more about Bucks and Nets. We'll know a little bit more about the players that are actually going to play in that game. So that will be a bit of fun. It's weird for the Bucks to have so many days off. But anyway, we're nearly through the week. So for Frank and myself, we'll leave it there. Catch you guys tomorrow.